More than anything, it's important to stay consistent, and we have been doing that. We've been giving you two shows a week. One of the reasons that I've been kind of experimenting with different times, like you guys see, we're going in the afternoon, is obviously sometimes our timings don't work with four different people, but ultimately, I want to provide not only the best content I can, but like a content where people can see it. So we are experimenting a bit um, with different times and different platforms. But just like always, we're going to review the slates that the lineups that we built on Saturday. But I always want to do it with a kind of nuance and a vibe that can propel us into the next week. So it's like so that way we're not looking at it like a graveyard, like it's some kind of depressing thing. But it's like, how can this help me win the next GPP? How can this help me format a different idea or a different pillar? Because Gov can tell you this as well, playing DFS as long as we have. GPPs are not meant to win every week. That's where you would play your cash games, your head-to-heads, and that's where we've taught Evan as well. It's like structuring contests that fit what you're trying to do. And so, like, GPPs aren't supposed to win it every week. Now, we did see a lot more snowflakes than I want to see in a lineup, so there is some improvement there. But I think as we review, we can do so with a wider lens. So speaking of a wider lens, let's bring the guys in. Evan, Gov, how we doing?
Not bad. Yourself?
I'm pretty well.
It's been a good week. It's been a nice holiday time.
And just so the people know, we don't have the youngster. Donnie is out there grinding money, I'm pretty sure, at this point, making money still at work. So we will miss him, but there will be plenty of time to get Donnie to fire off his takes. That's also why we're waiting on the spread picks, because the spread was kind of his baby. He really wanted to bring that to the show. So that's kind of his domain. So we'll review that thing and then do the spread picks on Saturday night with Donnie. But what about these lineups? Because we did a little bit of a review before the show. What about these lineups stuck out to you guys, or anything that you guys took away from these lineups particularly?
Well,
I liked the idea of having the cores. Like I thought that was a good idea. Just start. That was a good idea to build with, because that's usually what I try to do anyway. Is like if you were trying to build a multi lineup, if you were going to do a 20 max or 150 max, the biggest part of that is getting your player pool down to the guys you want, and then getting an optimizer to run the right combinations of those guys. So like I like the idea of getting to a core. And it does show you, like, we can look at everyone's core. For example, if you look at mine, like, I loved all of those plays, and I know why I played all of them, but they just didn't, and I also know why they didn't work out. Like,
this was your core, right?
yes, Swift, Cup, and Ayuk was my core.
Okay, yeah.
And we built around that. And, like, the San Francisco Ayuk, like, it could have easily been Debo, but I've been flipping back and forth on the two of them all week. And I thought I just thought it was due to be an Ayuk week against Washington.
I agree with that. Now,
Cup was more on, I should have probably just played Kyron, because he was the play from the Rams that week, but trying to get a little different, and we did with a 6% owned Cup. Yeah, instead of, I believe we have Kyron in another lineup, and he came in like 20-ish% or something.
Yeah, that's probably right.
And I didn't want to play two 20-ish% owned running backs, and Swift was part of my core. But my core could have easily been Kyron, Swift, and Ayuk of some sort. And then Swift is in an amazing spot, but it's just clear now Philadelphia is not going to use him that way. So he just can't smash spots like that like he needed
to. And I want to just have this open talk before we review the lineup specifically. I really like what we did here. I kind of fell into it accidentally. We've been kind of experimenting with different pillars. I kind of like having this idea where I give you guys three baseline guys that you want to build a lineup around, and then build that pillar from those three guys. That way, it kind of gives us a competitive edge to say this was my lineup. That way, we take an ownership of it, and then when we go to review it, you can explain, like Gov did, why he chose the guys he chose. And then it kind of creates this like in-game live reaction of being like, "Hey guys, this is my pillar. You know, my lineup finished ahead of yours because of this." And I just think that's a much healthier way and kind of an organic way to look at it, a pillar. And that way your true identity of that lineup comes through, and then we can draft off of it. I also thought it was very efficient to do it that way as well.
Yeah. I mean, it can be, and like, there's always good competition in there, and like to know that you have a core. Like, this is a line. Like, looking at it, I can definitely say there are plays in this lineup I would not have done. So, like, I can't straight up say, even with my core, that I would have ever built this lineup.
I was going to get into which ones I wouldn't have built, but I want to hear from you first, Gov, which ones you wouldn't have played.
I was never going to play any of the Denver stuff. That game looked like a total, like, fade that game completely. So I would have never played Judy. Ever. Like, he was not in my player pool. He was not on my list. I wasn't playing Powell. I wasn't playing Little Jordan Humphrey. I wasn't playing any Denver or Chargers that week.
I agree with you, Gov. I would have preferred to fade that week. I know Logan probably won't be happy to hear me say this, but I'm not surprised that we got the low output we did from Jerry Jeudy, even in a position where he could have been the top wideout. But Lil Jordan Humphrey ended up being the play because he fell into the end zone. But who the fuck was
like at that point, it's like now the only real play from that game is taking a dart throw on a 3K wide receiver, which there were plenty of Devontae Parkers in that to play. So it's like, do I even need that game?
Right,
and that was basically my thought there. Then there's also I don't like the New England guys, so I didn't have hardly any Parker or Pop Douglas or any of those other guys. Like, I didn't play any New England guys against Buffalo either. So, like, right there, that would have been the two I would have switched. I would have not had Parker and Judy, and that would have definitely been something closer to, like, I don't know, Shaheed and another 4K guy or something.
Like, I was and I was pro Shaheed as well with that one.
Or even like personally looking at it, I played a lot of Noah Brown, who again did not do anything.
Yeah.
But I would have definitely played Noah Brown as a correlation to Derrick Henry before I played Jerry Jeudy.
I agree with that as well, because Noah Brown does have great chemistry with CJ Stroud, but you know, that was a weird game.
It was another situation where, like, yeah, there's Brown and Collins, but there's no Tank. So we'll see how the condensed target share is. He could have smashed in that game. So, like, that would, like, just looking at it, like, I definitely could have seen playing Henry against Houston, but I would have like, Henry is a guy, like, if I'm playing him, I kind of want to correlate him with something. Like, if I'm playing him, I either want a guy on the other side, or I would have wanted the Tennessee defense.
Speaking of Derrick Henry, I have to ask, how was Derrick Henry drafted so low?
Yeah, I know. 1% Derrick Henry. That happens from time to time. And that's usually when he, like, puts up, like, a 40-point game, ironically. Like, historically, the times he puts up a 40-point game is the time he comes in sub 5% owned. Like, no one's thinking about Henry. No one's, like... And if you look at it on paper, like, he didn't have the best matchup. It was a divisional game on the road. He hadn't been doing well on the road all year. So, like, there were plenty of metrics to say that Henry was not as good of a running back play as, like, Swift against Arizona or Kyron or McCaffrey or any of the other, or Jonathan Taylor even. Like, there were a lot of good running back plays, and Henry was, like, 13th, 14th on that list. And in DFS, you usually stick to, like, the top 4 or 5 good plays and try to build around it. So that's where you get, like, the 10th best play is only 1% owned.
And Gov,
same thing with Kupp. It's not like Kupp isn't a bad play either. He'd been getting good volume in the offense, but he was maybe top 20 at wide receiver this week when you actually compare it, which why he came in sub 10%.
And I thought it was just interesting to see Henry's ownership so low, despite the weekly ranking he was at. That Houston is an opponent where you can absolutely run the football on them. It's not like they're amazing at stopping the run, but they're no scrubs either. But
I was about to say, like, I'm not so sure about that. They are not a team I would have attacked all year. Like, to start the season, everyone thought Houston was going to be like last year, which was the worst rush defense in the league. So everyone thought they were going to smash. In best ball, everyone loved trying to get Henry so you could set up Henry against Houston twice in the best ball playoffs.
And I will take back what I said, because Houston is actually the 4th best team in the league in stopping the run.
That's what I was about to say. Like, not only do I have not been, like, they have been one of the best rush defenses this year. Remarkably. Like, you wouldn't have expected to have that good of a turnaround, but they have been very, very good this year. Which is why I said, if you looked at the underlying metrics, Henry wasn't a great play, which is why his ownership came down. But it's Derrick Henry in December, and he is able to just have good games even on the road. Like, he's done that before. So, like, honestly, it might have been very close, because, like, he probably had like a 2 or 3% chance of actually smashing this week, but he comes in at 1% owned. So, like, that's the point where it's like, I had no problem with Henry in this lineup. Like, it's a pivot off of the Jonathan Taylors and the other running backs in that range that were pulling more ownership. And he's a stud who can go off. It's kind of like when Justin Jefferson is like 1% owned. He can go off any week. Is he going to go off the week he's 1% owned against like Buffalo or someone like that? Maybe not. Probably not. But it's not like he couldn't. And that's basically where Henry was. And at that ownership level, if he has that game, he immediately jumps this lineup up because no one else has him.
Yeah, Govin, that's why I love the play of Henry, because I'll make this correlation and see if it makes sense for you guys. But I did not like the metrics of Henry. Like, I thought Henry was a bad play. I didn't see that many paths for him getting there. That being said, I do think he's a superstar. And when you have a superstar who's also going to have that low ownership, I would have predicted him to come in at 2% owned. That is the reason I like the play.
I think he was projected at like 4 or something. He was projected for sub 5 anyway. I
would have thought around 2 because of his recent performance, but like, that's where I'm okay playing a legacy guy at such a superstar guy at such a low ownership, and that's why I was okay with it, because those guys can they can have that splash performance. It's very similar to Christian McCaffrey in the opposite of reasons. We were playing Christian McCaffrey whether he was 13% owned, whether he was $10,000 or $8,000 because of those metrics. So Henry is basically the opposite, where the Christian McCaffrey and Henry are both superstars. Yeah, their baselines are different in terms of expected value, but one getting low ownership, the other you don't care about ownership because you know the metrics are there. That's why I was okay playing both of them, even though they both failed this week. I thought we got the outcome we needed. Obviously, we can't, control the performance of the actual player, but I thought the reason why we played both of those guys made sense.
Can I get into a couple of things pretty amazing about Derrick Henry this year? In PPR formats for like regular fantasy football leagues, he's the 10th best running back. He's still a top 10 back, a superstar like you just said, Logan. He's already over 1,000 yards with one more game to go. His efficiency took a nosedive, but he's still got 11 rushing touchdowns, and he has 0 fumbles this year. 0.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He is a star who has the ability to bust out a big game. So, like, I'm willing to take a shot on that at low ownership almost any time it's available, even if the metrics say it's not likely.
Yeah.
Because the metrics aren't telling me, no, it can't happen. It's saying it's not likely.
I just thought that last part was amazing about Derrick Henry, as he's now gone 7, almost 8 years in a season without a single fumble. He's really improved at taking care of the football this year.
Oh, yeah, he definitely has.
Now, that doesn't mean he'll get a bunch of juice and be like super, electric next season or even in a couple weeks. But he's at least doing a lot of the same stuff you would expect Derrick Henry to do. Like, we're not expecting him to run a really amazing 40 or be like part of the Super Bowl team. And that's why I think people, they see the recent results and they want to make these blandish points like, well, his inefficiency is so bad he's now Eddie Lacy, or they try to troll with these kind of stupid narratives, and it's like sometimes the truth sometimes lies in the middle. I will say the Jerry Jeudy thing, not even to be a defender, of it was I like the quarterback change. Anytime you see a quarterback change, you, that's when I kind of like to bet on talent. Now, maybe I should have went cheaper because I also played a lot of Johnson in that game with the Mims news being out. Now, I didn't like Jerry Judy uh, with Mims playing, but without Mims, I figured they were going to go to somebody. Obviously, I took the more talented of the options. That might have been a mistake, but I did play some Jerry Judy and Marcus Johnson in my lineup, so like I did benefit from it as well on some ways, and at least transparently, even though it lost in that lineup, it also lost in some of my personal. So I can say when I do lose, at least I'm honest about it, and I do think there is an honest assessment of the things we do right and wrong. So I just want to be clear about that.
I think what's pretty concerning about Jerry Judy is that Lil Jordan Humphrey got more snaps than he did.
Yeah. Well, to speak on that game, for example, like I'm a guy that doesn't like to give up on guys where I see potential, and like Devontae Adams, for example, I was very high on this week because of the amount of targets he gets, and people were like, "Well, he hasn't turned that into points, and like he's getting targets still, but he's not performing." Right, but for me, it's like when I see a metric that I believe in, you got to stick with that metric. Sometimes you gotta believe that the numbers are going to pan out. Last week, Adams got 21 targets and caught like 17 of them. Now, that's what I'm saying. Like the outlier performance and the downgraded performance, you have to try to find a baseline of balance between the two. Like I'm not expecting Adams to get 40 every week, but I'm also not expecting him to have a Derrick Henry 4-point week. But both of those things have existed this season. And I think as a DFS player, you have to be willing to take both outcomes.
I think what has spoiled a lot of the veterans over the last several years is that Devontae Adams has had consistent offensive play in a system in Green Bay where he's always had Aaron Rodgers throwing to him, so they never had to break the consistency. Where now he's in Vegas, he's had to go through 3 different quarterbacks this year, which would be Jimmy Garoppolo, Brian Hoyer, and Aiden O'Connell now, and he still makes it work even with the dysfunction of a head coaching change too, where they fired Josh McDaniels this year.
Right.
And now that they have Antonio Pierce taking over, he's a little bit all over the place with his numbers depending on game script and the matchup. Because this Raiders team is still not good, but Pierce is still doing a very good job making lemonade out of lemons with this team, where they're going to lose closely to teams like the Colts, who are also horribly mismanaged. But Devontae Adams is still going to make whoever's throwing to him better, if not reach up to his potential. So Aiden O'Connell's got it good to start his career.
And go so we can transition to our next lineup, or just like a grander conversation here. It's sometimes you have to take that low performance in a lineup because that low performance might not have hit your expectation, but it allowed you to think about a block of players or a grouping of players that you wanted to play. Like maybe we were kind of boxed in to play Najee Harris in this lineup, for example, but there was reasons you chose Najee Harris. Now we got the highest of outcomes with that choice, but you obviously made that choice because you knew this potential was there, and that's the kind of thing I wanted to like really hone in on when we review these lineups. It's so that we don't just say like, oh, this lineup won $1 or this lineup won $100. It's like, because if we can look at what we got right and what we got wrong in lineups, then the next week we can try to get more right. You're always trying to think about it from a point of improvement more than like, hey, look at me, I got this right. Hey, look at me, I got this wrong.
I can agree with that.
Yeah. So, sorry, Gov, I was going to let you speak before I make my next point.
No, you can go first.
So I wanted to talk about Greg Dortch real quick. Being that he's the return specialist of the team, in addition to being one of the top wide receivers they have left after Hollywood Brown is out with a heel injury, how the hell was he only less than 5% owned?
Because no one wanted to play him versus Philly, which is weird because the metrics would say you should be. Well, that's the thing. The metrics would say you play the outside receiver versus Philly because they've been going off all year, whoever it was.
Mhm.
Even the Giants playing Philly, Darius Slayton has a big game. Like, so seeing that, I know a lot of people wanted to play Michael Wilson. I'm pretty sure Michael Wilson came in at like 18%.
Also a good play.
But Greg Dortch being more of a slot receiver and the kick returner, people would look at that and be like, well, he's not going to get all that outside volume against Philly.
Mhm.
So most of the time, like, really, he probably could have been a 1% owned guy. But Hurts was the highest owned quarterback, and Philly was a stack people were playing. And as you saw, even DeAndre Swift came in at like 20% almost. So Dortch being a bring back in some of those, or being sort of linked to the high owned Philly guys, is the only reason he came in right around 5%. Otherwise, he would have been like Derrick Henry, a 1% owned guy.
Yeah, I just think a lot of people were sleeping on Dortch as a discount option at wide receiver, being that he did get 82% of the snaps, which I don't know if people were counting on against a weak Philly secondary where Matt Patricia's calling the defensive plays over there.
Right.
So and we all saw, I think, what happened with Philly in that game where they just fucking blew it.
Yeah, somehow Arizona has come to play against the NFC East this year.
And not even just the NFC East, like they gave my Bears kind of hell at times, whereas my Bears defense wanted to blow it against the Cardinals, but they just held their own. They've been really surprising with teams that are sleeping on them.
Yeah, like they're more a competitive team than people think with Kyler back there, but they are still Arizona.
Yeah,
like honestly, them beating Philly and them beating Dallas, oh well. Like yeah. I say that like I don't think it actually means anything, because I know Arizona's team is not that good. They are talented, and as you can see on any given Sunday, a talented team can come and play and win. But I know they are multiple pieces away from being a true contender. So I just see that as an outlier. Like I see that more as Philly's been looking really awful the last couple weeks, more than I see that as, oh, Arizona came to play.
Right. I think that's
I think people are giving, I honestly think it's people are giving Philly too much credit more than people are overlooking Arizona. Although it is clear that Philly overlooked Arizona, and Philly being not as good of a team as people think, they can't afford to do that to anyone.
Can we also fairly say that people are also giving Arizona too much credit at the same time, being that they're not a good team and Philly let them have it?
Yeah, like you can say that. Like they're not a great team. Everyone can agree on that. Like Arizona's not a great team. But Philly has been playing very poorly, and they did not come to play in that game well enough to beat what is not a great team. And again, it's semantics in the NFL. Yes, the best team is way better than the worst team, but the worst team is not that much different than the other 10 teams at the bottom of the league. And the best team is not that much different than the top 5 or 6 teams in that league. And that's where it is. There is a large gap from 1 to 32, but there is a very small gap from 1 to 6 and a very small gap from 32 to 21. If you were to rank the teams. And I think most people lose sight of that. So Arizona, who's probably 22 or 23, I don't think Arizona is the worst team in the league. I don't think they should be close to having the number 1 pick, any kind of thing like that. But they're still probably a bottom 10 team. Mm-hmm. But that means a bottom 10 team can beat a team that thinks they're in the top 5, but is probably 9th or 10th, which is what Philly looks like. They were a contender last year. They're still a contender. They're still a top 10 team, but they have done some things this year that make you think they're not a top 5 team.
Yeah, and I was saying since week 1, well, not week 1, but since the middle of the season that no NFL team looks great this year, and I think I'm ready to eat those words when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens. I think they're the only great team this year.
Yeah, again, I have no,
But
did you see how many of those balls were one-handed catches and were off target, and the receivers had to make plays just to let Lamar's offense flow?
Shouldn't receivers make plays though?
Yes, they should, but they're not for every other. Like, you look at every other team, receivers are dropping balls all the time this year.
Now
Wide open, hits them in the hands, drops the balls. And then you have a game like like the Baltimore-Miami game where they destroy Miami. But that OBJ catch, Flowers likely had one they caught one-handed. Like, I'm sorry, Lamar's accuracy is still going to be his biggest problem. That being said, we've seen this throughout his career. That team is very good. And as long as he doesn't make large mistakes, they are going to be very dominant.
And I think you would even agree with, like, he's allowed to have weaknesses, but then you can still see his strengths. And
again, Lamar's strengths haven't, honestly, like, that's the thing. I don't think Lamar is any different than he's been the last few years.
Right.
And that is, I think, is the problem. Because, like, most people, like, he's now basically the front runner for MVP. And is probably going to win it again. Unless, like that Purdy was going to win it. And if he does, even if they lose that game, if Purdy doesn't throw 4 interceptions, I still think he's winning the MVP.
Well, if I'm being honest, like, that is the point that I will agree with you. I can't agree with your first point on the receivers, but I can agree with the second point. It's like, we started this conversation with Najee Harris and expectations. I think what happens a lot of times is, like, we look at a story and we associate an expectation to that story. And it's like, well, now let's look at the results. So Najee Harris goes out and has 20-something points this week, right? We just talked about how Henry had all that potential, all the same outcome variance. He obviously didn't get there. So,
honestly, Najee is sort of the opposite of Henry, though.
Right.
In what ways?
So, we talked about with Henry, he was low owned because he was looking at the metrics, was not in a good spot, was not facing a good defense.
Yeah.
So even though he's a stud, people looked at the matchup and were like, there's plenty of other places to go than paying up for Henry in not a good spot. You look at those same metrics, and Najee should have been a top 3 choice last week. Seattle's been piss poor against the run.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All year. And Pittsburgh has been a run-first team all year. Like, the only reason to not play Najee was everyone wanting to play Jaylen Warren and thinking Jaylen Warren, oh, he's the better back. He's going to come in and do everything. That's another thing. Like, I don't agree with that at all. Jaylen Warren has been getting passing game work. And when you get passing game work, you have open space to have explosive plays. Yeah, has he broken off a 50-yard touchdown yet this year?
Once.
Really? Really? Yeah, I thought that was 34.
I mean, I could be wrong about the yardage.
I'm legit saying, has he broken off a more than a 50-yard or higher touchdown? He's had the explosive times to do that. So, like, if he hasn't done that, like, I'm sorry. Jaylen Warren is not as explosive of a player as people think. He gets in space and does stuff with it. And they only use him for that. They are still giving Najee all of the normal running back work.
Yeah, because number one, this is a split backfield. It's almost
I disagree with I disagree with that 100. Najee gets 70% of the work when it comes to running back carries. Warren gets 90% of the running back passing game work. And so when Warren's getting 6 targets a game, you think they're splitting, and you think Warren's more explosive. Warren gets no carries inside the 5. He gets no carries with 2-3 yards left to get. And Najee still gets some passing game work. The coach came out and said, we're going to give Warren more. And you know what that has done? That has caused him to get the first carry of the game and nothing more at all year.
Gov, you just took my point and said it more passionately, so I'm glad you did it. My thing was that people, they don't want to play Henry because they look at his price and they look at what he was and like, oh, he disappointed. But then if I showed you Najee Harris, he's splitting with Warren, and you could say, like, it doesn't matter. It's the bad team. Well, Tajay Spears also splits with Henry, but they had the same. They have the same outcome viability or chance, and so and they're very similar. Owned. One is 1%. One was 2%.
Again,
So
it's a little different because Tajay can literally do everything Henry does. So they split because Tajay can be the pure backup. So when you don't need Henry to have 70% of the carries, you can give Tajay more run.
You think Tajay could work in the goal line like Henry?
Yes, I do. I think if you gave him the time. Now, rookie year, no.
Yeah.
He needs to get NFL ready. Like, that was the one thing about Derrick Henry. Because he played at Alabama, he came out NFL ready.
Again,
that's another thing, like we were talking before. There's not a lot of running backs that are really good running backs nowadays. And most players, I include every position.
Yeah.
Most players need a year just to be ready to play in the NFL. There are very, very few rookies. Like CJ Stroud is like the one rookie this year who's come out and immediately been NFL ready. Rashee Rice took 4 games playing with Mahomes before he finally was crisp with his routes and catching balls. Like all of the rookies need time to adjust to the NFL pace and to their teams and to their offense. And so Tajay, I 100% think can be Henry starting next year. And you've seen flashes where he could do that.
I will firmly disagree with that, being that he's yet to prove that he can go up against the tougher defenses and prove that he's matchup-proof the way Derrick Henry was in his prime.
Right,
Whereas
but they also have not given him that chance.
This is also a different Titans team where they just don't have the same blocking and they don't have the same talent around.
Agreed. So exactly. Like, I don't expect Tajay to come out and put up exactly or better than Henry's numbers with this team.
But that's
because he's not getting the whole 100% workload splitting with Henry, and it's not the same blocking and offensive line that Henry got to run behind for 6 years.
Right.
Yeah. And Tajay is basically playing a Jalen Warren type of role.
Not even. Because they're not giving Tajay all this extra passing game work that they don't give Henry. They just don't actually pass to their running back.
He's getting 6 targets a game.
Is Tajay getting Warren's getting 6 targets a game? I haven't seen Tajay getting 6 targets a game.
Yeah, he's gotten 6 or more targets a game over the last 5 games.
Really?
Yeah, they have a similar workload.
Hold on, my numbers are off then. I don't have those numbers at all.
Yes.
3-2, 3-3-3.
So, except for Week 15 against Houston, he's gotten 6 targets, 8 targets, 6 targets, and then 6 targets again. He's basically taking all the passing down work from Derrick Henry.
I mean, well, Derrick Henry never got passing down work to begin with, but
yes.
I got to check that because I don't have those numbers in my sheets.
Well, one of the biggest differences, though, you got to remember is the Steelers kind of have this traditional format where the Tennessee has had to go with different quarterback. I mean, I guess the Steelers did too with different injury concerns. But I mean, so it's not a 1-for-1 comparison. But my greater point, just so we don't get lost in semantics here, is how expectations can kind of make a play good or bad. If we see that snowflake, we're like, oh, he's a bad play. Or if we see that red flame, we're like, we hit one. We did good. Our lineup this week that actually cashed had a lot of snowflakes, but we were right. And even the things that didn't snowflake or cash were right enough. They normalized this lineup enough where we could min cash. And I think sometimes we get lost in this idea that we have to hit everything perfectly. Sometimes our mistakes are why lineups cash. I honestly think if this lineup that you built, Evan, that was your pillar build.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly think if you would have picked a different tight end, this lineup does not cash. I honestly think if you would have taken somebody other than Pitts, this lineup doesn't cash because then you would have done something else with the money. Maybe you wouldn't have, but that's just my belief, is that sometimes people look at the outcome or how much money they have left, or, hey, I have $800 here, I have $1,000 left here. I need to do something with this amount of money, or we need to make this change, and then the whole lineup changes.
Yeah, I will likely always disagree with you on that, Logan, where it's like you can pick you could just pick
Wow.
a cheap tight end or a cheap defense and just go for another player where the lineup could potentially cash if you just punt at a certain position. I don't necessarily agree with that because if I had just picked Everett over Pitts and then picked someone else with the leftover cash at flex that did do better, which I don't have that list in front of me, maybe we can find that, but I think it would have done slightly. We potentially could have cashed a little more if we just had swapped out Pitts with Everett and then picked someone else at flex.
But I'm saying, like, if you did that and you take Everett over Pitts, I'm saying you might have decided to not play, Rice. You might have decided to move up from Rice. Like, so that butterfly effect can work in the opposite direction. That's all my only point.
Well, Rashi Rice was Gov's pick, which was a fantastic pick, and I can't believe he was only 12.6% owned.
Yeah, that one was a little surprising. I think everyone in that game was a little low owned. Chase came in lower owned than I expected. Kelsey came in lower owned expected. Pacheco came in lower owned, even though he was a late add to be able to play.
Right. That I guess that's my larger point was just that, like, sometimes you have to be like, hey, the Shaheed play made sense.
And you're right, my data was pulled in wrong. So I did not see the Tajay stuff. Like I pull in data on the slate on Sunday night and Monday morning to review all my stuff. And double checking, it did not pull in Tajay Spears' data right. Because you're right, he has been getting all those targets the last few weeks. My shit's been saying 3 targets, 3 targets, 3 targets, like generic.
What's
So like there's probably another Spears or something.
And God, that's why I honestly ask for as many subs as we can, because it's not about trying to be the best podcast or like the most liked podcast or the one that gets the most attention. The one thing I'm most proud that we do is we're transparent. We've been showing you every lineup we build with the intention that we're going to show you what we got right, what we got wrong, and then when we get things wrong, we'll admit it. Like, but I can at least explain to you why I did those things. Like, I respect Evan tremendously on his football opinions, even though we very rarely agree on the format of how we get there. Usually, we still enjoy football Sundays the same way, Evan, but we just view it differently. And I really like that. Now, I will say, for example, one of my DFS processes that probably doesn't make a lot of sense for a lot of DFS traditionalists is I really enjoy listening to a sports gambling perspective for part of my DFS kind of like mindset, because they don't have the DFS pricing in their heads, so they're not trying to push a price narrative on me. So they're just saying, hey, this player is good, or I like this prop, or I like this game situation, but they're not trying to tell me, hey, do you know Jerry Jeudy? He's only 5,000 this week. They're just saying, hey, Jerry Jeudy could catch 30, could catch over 30 yards. Or, Kyle Pitts could catch 2 passes today. I think it'd be a good prop. And, bringing in Evan this year, he was like, I don't know that much about DFS, but I'm like, the things you do know can apply to DFS in just a unique way that, like, the way we go about lineup building can be very fascinating and kind of nuanced for a lineup building. So I do think that's important to do when we look at these lineups, or even we build lineups on Saturday, is always to try to bring something new to the table, even if we've done this for years.
So I agree with pretty much all of those points, Logan, but I gotta bring up one more topic here as I'm just noticing this now, shaking the cobwebs out of my head here. Did everybody fade that Falcons-Bears game? Because how the hell was Fields and Moore owned so low in addition to Pitts?
The only person who pulled ownership in that game was Bijan.
That's fucking weird because Bijan has been horribly misused all year.
And right. Gov is right, though. If everyone's playing the running back from that game, then you're obviously expecting a different game script than what we played, Evan.
And let me get this straight to all the people who play Bijan. You were going to play Bijan Robinson against the top running defense in the NFL that allows the least yardage per game on the ground.
Yes, they were, because and you can quote me and check this, but the reason everyone, and this is what was being thrown around last week, you are the top rushing defense when it comes to yards per carry.
Yes.
The problem is you're like bottom 5 when it comes to yards per catch to running backs and targets and catches given up to running backs.
Hence Tyler Allgeier's touchdown.
Yeah, which is why everyone wanted to play Bijan, thinking he's going to get 8 targets and break one of those. And then Allgeier does it because fuck Arthur Smith.
I was going to say, did people forget about Tyler Allgeier?
No, I played Tyler Allgeier in my championship league, and I won. Yay.
Yay.
Well, so, like, I understood what could happen there. Another reason why I did not play Pitts, I did not play Bijan, even though he was chalky. Like, I admit, had we not played this, like, I understood Fields and why I could play him against Atlanta, but I also did not end up building a field stack in mine. I was very, like, I basically only played Lamar and Purdy, and then I took a shot with Derek Carr. Those were my only quarterbacks this week.
Shout out to Donnie for suggesting the field stack with Moore.
Yeah, good one. Very good one. And unless we had brought it back with Allgeier, there was no really good run back on Atlanta.
And again, I love to do that when everyone thinks the game's going to go one way. When you totally flip the script and play it the opposite way, like let's assume Bijan was a good play and he hit, right? If the run game for the Falcons does well, then our stack probably doesn't do that well, or you need a different combination.
Well, no, like honestly, one of the reasons Chicago had to push and Fields and Moore got where they were was because Atlanta was like early, like Allgeier got the run. Like
that's a good point.
I feel like that wasn't a 20-point game until like middle of the third quarter. That first half, Atlanta played them tough, and then Chicago blew them out.
Yeah, and before the second quarter expired, I'll just leave it at this. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. Matt Eberflus tricked Arthur Smith into burning a timeout later in the second quarter, which says a lot about Arthur Smith and how awful he is. When Eberflus can do it, that's how you know you got a bad head coach.
But then looking at this lineup, like I look at the ownership and I'm like, this is how it should be done. We found an extremely low-owned stack with Fields and Moore and Pitts. And it's like, okay, let's just play all the best plays that everyone likes around him. Let's play chalk Zamir White. Let's play chalk Christian McCaffrey. Let's play Shaheed that everyone wanted to play as their cheap guy. Let's play Everett that everyone wanted to play as their tight end.
Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Pitts this year because of how horribly misused he was, but my reasoning for picking Pitts as a part of my starting pillar was that I was thinking Pitts could potentially get potentially 4 to 5 catches, which could have broken off for big yardage. Even if he didn't fall into the end zone,
he could have had 5 for 90 or 5 for 105 with the bonus and been good.
Bingo, exactly. That was what I was thinking, is that could be the potential stat line, even if he didn't fall into the end zone.
Well, and that's where, Evan, I don't really care about the results as much as I care about the type of player you're playing him and why you're playing him that way.
Well, if you don't care about the results, you're in the wrong game, my friend.
Well, because we can't predict the results.
No, of course not. But you want to bank on the highest percentage possibility of who's going to get you the best results.
Agreed. But I would say that's different.
Why?
Because if we can't predict the results, then to only hope for the results is kind of tricking yourself. What you should do is look at the probability based on the player you're choosing. Like, you played Pitts because you thought he was explosive, right?
He is extremely talented with athleticism and explosive when he gets the ball. Yeah.
Right. So you thought he was going to do something with those 3 to 4 catches. It wasn't just that he was going to get 3 to 4 catches, because then you would have played, a lesser talented tight end that might also, maybe got 5
catches.
Just,
like he said, he could have just played Everett and still gotten 3 or 4 catches.
Right.
Bingo.
So I think we were saying the same thing. We just had different ways to get there, which often happens with us.
Well, because we play Christian McCaffrey because we expect a range of results that he can bring to the table, especially against a horrible Washington defense. But we didn't expect him to hurt his calf. So it happens.
But I mean, he had I think he had 12 before he got hurt. He had over 10. Like, he was never going to have a good day. But that's why I'm okay.
Sorry.
I'm okay playing that game though, based on even if we don't get the highest of his outcomes, the median or the projected workload makes that a good play for me. So
Well,
like as long as it makes sense for the rest of your lineup, as long as you can budget for it, basically.
Like I get what Logan's saying. Like we're not trying to we're not really making a prediction model. So like we're not trying to like say, oh, he's gonna do this, so I'm gonna play him.
Right.
We are basing it on a range of outcomes. But I hear what Evan's saying. It's like there's a reasoning why we were looking at that probability and playing a certain way on it.
Right. I think me and Evan are very closely aligned on this, actually. We just have different ways about saying it, which is confusing the translation. All I'm saying is I don't care how we get to 320 points, as long as we get to 320 points. I think that's the goal, is like to have one of these high, score outcomes. Where
because when you spend 9,600 on a Christian McCaffrey that week because it's a juicy matchup,
Yeah.
you might be a little disappointed that you only got 13.1 points out of him. But
Right.
fantasy football, no matter if you're playing DFS or just for some vanilla redraft league, you want to build the best possible lineup and not just bank on one player and then hope a bunch of other dart throws hit.
No,
But
but even thinking about it from a season-long perspective,
yes,
there is no chance. If you said like I get to draft a season-long team every week kind of thing, like that's all DFS is I get to draft my team every week. So I get to look at that week's matchups and determine where a guy should go draft order wise. And I think we all can agree McCaffrey would have been, if you were drafting, a top 2 pick this week.
Yeah, easily. Because of the juicy matchup, and that's why his price reflected as it was.
And that's why his ownership was so high. Like, everyone saw that McCaffrey could and should have been a top pick this week.
Right.
And now, him failing is something that is possible to happen. Mm-hmm. He failed basically because of injury, which is one of the things that, like, I have the hardest time with, because I do need to just be like, okay, he got injured. Let's move on to the next slate. There's nothing I can do about someone getting injured. Then again, there are certain guys who, like, you have to watch it for. So it's very hard. And McCaffrey is one of those guys, like, I don't really watch for him to get an injury, but I also know from being a Panthers fan that if he gets a lower leg injury, you really do need to watch him.
I don't know if this range exactly makes sense, but let me make this point. Well, and I think it will make a lot more sense to everyone once I do. What I'm saying is, like, playing the upside of McCaffrey puts you in a range also with your other players in your lineup. So
inevitably,
if we play McCaffrey, we're not going to then play Shaheed, for example. Like, I just want to make this point. And so then if we don't play Rashid, then we have to go to a range that might be lower than him, and we play a Greg Dortch. And if we play Greg Dortch over Shaheed this week, for example, we score more points. And so, like, but maybe we play Shaheed and then we play Williams and we get off of McCaffrey. And so, like, that's where if you look at points in a vacuum, you can be like, well, this guy was a good play and this guy was a bad play. And, like, sometimes
you do need to look at the underlying metrics. Like,
right.
Yes, he put up points. Like, I do this every night in NBA. Like, yes, this guy had a good fantasy score. Why did he have that good fantasy score?
Right.
Was it something that happened crazily? Or vice versa? He had a bad fantasy score. Why?
And that's where, like, Evan's never going to like my stars and scrubs lineups. He's never going to like it.
I don't like your stars and scrubs lineups, but I understand them.
But I did play Stidham this week. I played Stidham a year ago.
I was going to play Bryce Young this week. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, I played Stidham last year when he scored 30 points, and everyone thought I was crazy. I played Will Levis this,
No, you are one to, like, I will find the value and hope for the upside, knowing that there is upside. It's just a low percentage upside.
Right.
And then, like, if anything, Logan, like, you look at this lineup that I have here, the one that we had that cashed.
Yeah.
And like I said, the one thing I love about it the most is that we took a few shots on some low-owned guys in basically the Atlanta-Chicago stack. After that, we just plugged in dudes who everyone knew were at least decent plays because they're all 10% or higher, and most of them are actually the chalk. Like, to be fair, McCaffrey, White, Shaheed, and Everett would have been put in almost any lineup if you had an optimizer.
So don't you agree though? That's how we should build these pillars going forward, just so we have our own identities to these lineups. Where we pick 3 guys, that's like our identity, and then we can actually track it. Because I do think this is like one of our best review shows, because you could look at it and say, this is why I picked 3 guys, or hey guys, I'm sorry I picked these 3 guys and they were terrible. You know?
Like if you go back to my lineup, which was the worst one we had,
right? Which actually I thought was one of the best
compare the, like just looking at that, like you compare that, and then you look at my lineup, and it's like, oh, yeah. I put in a core that was already not very owned. That already had a 6% owned guy, and then like Swift and Ayuk, who are decently owned, but like they're like Rashee Rice. No one was actually playing a crap ton of them, but everyone knew he was in a good spot. Then we kind of screwed up my lineup. I'll say it this way, like we then kind of screwed up the lineup by jamming in a bunch of random guys that no one was playing. Like no one's playing Devontae Parker. If anyone was playing a New England guy, they were playing Pop. Or Zeke. No one was playing Devontae. No one was playing Judy. They were playing the Powells and the cheap guys because they didn't expect Judy, who was one of their wide receivers, to get play when Denver said they were going to come out and try new guys at the wide receiver core. And then they ended up throwing to like 10 dudes that game. So it's like, and then Austin Hooper. That was just us trying to make stuff fit by adding a minimum salary tight end.
Yeah, that was Logan's idea, which I'm never thrilled about a $2,500 tight end. But, I mean, we figured that it would make sense at the time with Aiden O'Connell possibly using Hooper as like a short yardage safety blanket. But it just didn't happen. He only had 3 catches that didn't really go too far.
And again, it could have worked out.
If he fell in the end zone, we wouldn't be complaining.
Maybe more than the 1% he was owned. It just didn't because there was only like a 2% chance that it worked out that way.
No,
I'm looking at this lineup and I'm like, with the core I put in, we got so different in this lineup. It's like it just looks like we made a bad lineup here around my core.
I agree with Evan on a lot
in
of
hindsight, there's no reason we shouldn't have just played Zamir White and Rashid and who was the other, and Everett.
But that's where
there's no reason we shouldn't have played those 3 guys in this lineup.
Yeah, and that's where hindsight can be beautiful. I mean, I would argue
why we review. That's why you review the lineups the next day. That's why you look at your lineups and see how they did, and look at where they landed ownership. Again, I don't care so much about how well they did. That will just determine how much money I won. I do want to see where the field was building, so I know if my thought process is correct in building lineups.
And I think Evan would agree with this, even though he'll never agree with the punt play tight end. It's because we'll never agree with the philosophy, because I would tell you that you don't need to fall into the end zone at that price. Pat Fryermuth a couple weeks ago didn't do that. He was coming back from injury, got like 7 targets, smashed that week, and that was a big week. And so those weeks are the weeks where you can survive for weeks like this. Like in a GPP, you only need a couple wins every year to be profitable. And so like you're going to swallow a bunch of losses when you have that mindset. But that mindset also helps you have big wins. And so sometimes you have to take chances to make money. That's why it's a gamble. That's why it's a risk.
Well, Fryermuth is never going to be a $2,500 tight end unless something happens to his career.
He was this year.
Well, that's because he was out for all of the year.
I know.
And then the one game he came back, it was that weird thing where it's like
that's what I'm
you have
saying.
to activate him. They activated him after salaries already came out. So like he should have had an IR tag and been 2,500. But then Pittsburgh did that. So, like, yes, we had one random week because of injury where Fryermuth was 2,500.
That's all I'm saying is, like, that's. And
to be fair, Logan, I want to point, like, that was a total luck box by you getting that right. He has not produced since that game where his prices come up. He has not had the volume or usage since that game that's even close to what he got in that game.
No,
That game was an anomaly where a lot of weird stuff happened that week. That was the week they fired their head coach, and Freiermuth came back off of injury. So they gave him the 7 targets instead of having the quarterback throw to Deontay and Pickens more.
yeah.
That happened one game, and then the next game's on, they didn't even have their normal quarterback.
Steelers fired Matt Canada, not the head coach.
I'm sorry, not Tomlin, but they fired their offense. Like, you got to remember, like, that week coincided with him coming off of a 6-week injury, not sure he's going to play, fired their offensive coordinator knowing they need to change stuff. And he has not gotten close to that level of usage or volume since. You kind of got lucky, played him when he was stupid cheap, and he had his best game of the year.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily mean playing the cheap tight end is always the way to go.
Like, that is not the reason to play the cheap tight end. If that is your reasoning of why it's okay to play the cheap tight end, that is bad process and bad reasoning.
No, I'm saying whatever your reason is, sometimes luck is going to be factored in. That was my only
True, but I don't care about that. Luck, to me, goes both ways. I see it that, okay, so I treat luck the way you should treat the word regression.
Yeah, go ahead. Explain
which is you can have positive and negative regression. I can regress to the mean and I get better because I regressed to the mean of the average because I was playing below the average. Most people mix that up and think, no, shouldn't you say progress? I'm like, no, I didn't get better. I got back to even. That's the thing. And most people don't realize that there's a huge difference between regression and progression. And they're not actually connected, truthfully. They're actually like the opposite of each other. But they both can have positive and negative. Like, I can negatively progress. I can progress where it makes me worse. I'm going forward and getting worse at the same time. Negative progression. Right? Those are actual things. And so luck is the same way. Like, you got positive luck when you played Freiermuth, and he got that weird game that he hasn't had since.
Exactly. And that's
he got negative luck in McCaffrey getting hurt and not playing the rest of that game against Washington.
Well, that's all I was trying to say. And, like, I wasn't trying to say I was right, Evan was wrong. I'm saying, like, when you play a guy like that, you're not expecting that much. And so when you don't expect that much, you can favor the luck element more. Like, when we play Christian McCaffrey, you need more guarantees than you need luck. There's obviously some luck involved in playing McCaffrey. You don't want him to get hurt.
You know, I don't like thinking about it that way.
Yeah,
I don't want any luck. Like, I should be able to build a good lineup that has luck not involved.
I see what you're
this
saying.
is a game of skill that we're playing in DFS.
Oh, I agree with that.
Numbers game, and yes, luck is involved. As much as luck is involved in any other sport or game. Luck is involved in Monopoly because the dice roll. You still have to know how to play and deal to do the game and have the skill for it. Or take any other game. There's luck involved in everything. But I do not focus on the luck. I do not point out the luck, and I do not say I needed to get lucky in this play.
Yeah, the luck is just going to be inevitable in the game that you just can't get too focused on.
It's kind of like the way you treat the outcome. That's how I treat luck. The outcome doesn't matter. The luck does not matter. You shouldn't even bring it up, in my mind. That's my thought.
See, I love that, Go. I actually agree. That's 100% my point. It's like, it's just we're speaking a different language, but we're saying the same word. Like, to me, that's what we're doing here. And I hope people can look at this review or like a lineup build and be like, you know what? You know, Logan might have made a bad selection there, but I love Evan's point here and why he built this block. And so I'm going to take what I like from this lineup and what I don't like, and I'm going to make it my own. And that's really what we're trying to do by bringing all these ideas together. And, like, I've really enjoyed this show. If you guys want any other topics discussed before we close up shop, but, like, you guys gave me an hour, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. I thought today's show was very well structured.
Before we go, I wanted to go back to my lineup with the pillar that happened to cash for $1.50. just based on the way we built that particular lineup.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like what Gov just said. We took a chance on a stack that was going to be low owned from a game that everybody wanted to fade, and then we played 4 guys that could be considered. Was it 4 guys that could be considered chalky, Gov?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
So
4
4
guys who I would consider chalky. They were all 20% or higher.
Yeah.
And like 3 of them were basically in your cash game build.
You put Shahid in there because he's over 0.5, right?
Yeah.
Shahid was one of those fringe, like if you have 40, like a lot of guys cash game build had 4,800 left, you just plug in Shahid.
Right.
Some people plugged in who was the $4,700 guy? I know there was one. I forget.
Douglas was another one of them. Yeah.
It was Douglas and that. Like some guys did that, some guys did Shahid. That's why he wasn't 30% owned like Everett. He was 20% owned.
Hold on.
But like we did. We played a lot of the chalk. We took a shot on a low owned stack, and then we played a lot of the best plays, as the industry would say. They were the chalk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everyone was talking about him. Like Zamir White in that role is too underpriced.
Yeah,
like even him having a bad game, which 70 rushing yards, 35 receiving yards on 5 catches. That's not even a horrible game. He just didn't fall in the end zone.
Yeah.
That was my point earlier too, Gavin. I'll let Evan get back to it. It's like sometimes we look at the flame emojis or the snowflake emojis, and we don't acknowledge that 15 points is neither. It's the baseline. It's exactly what you need.
For his price, he hit value.
Right.
That's fine. Yeah.
If we don't play him, we might have played someone worse, and we get a snowflake, and then we can't afford the flame of DJ Moore or somebody else.
Yeah, most likely we weren't going cheaper, so you get off Zamir White to play someone lower owned.
Right.
Now you have to play. Now we're getting off of either Rice or Moore, and we're losing those points.
So it's that laddering effect. You were saying though, Evan?
So I wanted to make my point here. Being that we happen to set the lineup just like this, can we treat the way we built this like a template for the future and see if it continues to work? Even if we don't cash every time, can we get close to cashing every time, just like this?
I would hate to do that because
no, finish, Logan. You're good.
No, I just think it's a daily fantasy sport. So to Gus' point earlier, it's like you have to be willing to adapt and evolve as the sport evolves. So like this format and this idea, I don't know exactly what you mean by this, Evan. So you might be making this exact point.
Well, like you mean like the construction of like find our low-owned core or stack or whatever it is, and then just fill it in with all of the guys everyone's playing, the high-owned dudes.
Yeah.
Maybe specifically just those high-owned dudes.
Yeah, even if it's not the best idea 100% of the time every single week, can we bank on that and have the highest percentage outcome of either coming close to cashing or cashing?
It definitely can work, especially in like a single entry. Like that is kind of a good way to build a single entry in my mind, is like find your low-owned piece that in a single entry will probably even be more low-owned because of how that tends to condense towards the better plays of the projections. But, like, yeah, as long as you did that, like this lineup here in a single entry probably would have had like 1% on Fields and Moore and Pitts.
Yeah.
But then White would have been 65% owned and McCaffrey would have been 45% owned.
That's okay.
And Everett would have been 35 to 40% owned.
Yeah, this was
But that's fine. Like we're getting less ownership on other guys, so the chalkier, as we call them, plays get a little more ownership.
This was a 3-max.
Like this, this was more of a 3-max, but like that you still build it sort of the same way. Like also the single entries are also smaller field. The smaller the field, the more likely you can eat some of these bigger number chalky guys.
And that's all
I think for the tournaments we play, this is a really good build because we have enough low owned. We have at least a couple sub 5%ers that can put us at the top of the tournament. And then we have enough of the chalk to keep everyone else back from us. Like this was what you're saying and the way we could construct a lineup like this, I think is viable. And we could do that. I wouldn't mind doing that as a pillar this final week.
And that's honestly why I love bringing each one of you a pillar. And I think that the way we should start to do this is like our pillar should include the 3 blocks, the 3 players that we want, because that speaks to that identity.
Well, part of our pillar could just be a block. Maybe this week my pillar is I love these block of players. Let's get them in a lineup.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not a block as much as it's a stack. It's like, I love this game.
Or
Let's
concept,
start
right?
with Josh Allen,
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs, and a New England guy or whatever.
Right.
Or in this one, Fields, Moore, and Pitts or something. Like that's a great way. Like when I think of a pillar, that's what I'm thinking about. I don't really think of like all year we've been giving out ideas and stuff, but like the best pillars are when we think about the players and the situations we like, and we just put in those guys, as opposed to like, let's build a lineup with sub 5K guys, or let's build a lineup with all
right.
dudes from these low total games or something. It's definitely viable to build a good lineup that way, and it gives you a good perspective on the slate. Because, like I said, in my personal stuff, I X'd out Denver and New England. That doesn't mean little Jordan Humphrey and who was it on New England? Someone on New England had a decent game. I forget who it was. Maybe I'm off on that. But like, it doesn't mean there weren't plays from those games I shouldn't have thought about. And that is good perspective to have. So
Well,
like,
the Patriots defense played well.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The Patriots defense. But like, that's the thing. Like, it's one of the reasons why, like, in our Discord, I'll have the discussion on earlier in the week, go game by game with people and just be like, are there any good plays in this game from a fantasy perspective in general? Like, who would actually score the fantasy points in this game? And like, sometimes to think about that is good.
Right.
But that doesn't technically have to be the pillar. The pillar should be something that holds up the lineup, which usually is a core of players, or like a build concept can work as long as it's I just lost the word. Shit.
While you're thinking of that word, the play for the Patriots would have been Zeke.
There we go. Yeah.
And that's just because he fell in the end zone.
Right. To correlate. Yeah, but I mean that's a good point. I want to continue to build pillars this way because I really do like this review show. This I think we're onto something here, because I'm probably never going to convince you that the cheap tight end is the way to build. But let's say I liked a cheap tight end that week and it made sense because I think he's going to get volume, or there's an opening with a coach and like somebody's mispriced. If I say, hey, Evan, you don't have to like this, but we're going to play this block of players. We're going to play this block because of this reason. And I can give you more than just a concept reason. You might not like it, but it forces you to think like me for that moment. And that's why I think we offer each other. It's a way to appreciate each other's thought process and then be like, okay, how can I help Logan think in a way he's not thinking? So I can use his idea, but how can I, allow that thought to kind of take on a different life? And that's kind of
and it is good perspective. Like, that is the
right.
one thing. Like, the one thing I would say to everyone, like, I don't care who you are. I don't care how smart you are. I don't get, like, you do not have 100% perspective on everything, or even on the thing you're focusing on.
It's impossible.
So it is exactly.
And
it is always good to get other people's input. You may not do anything with it, but it is there for you to take in.
Yep. And Logan, to get back to your Freiermuth play that we did in week 12, there at least was some justification to do that, being that Freiermuth has always been the safety blanket for somebody like a Kenny Pickett, who, if he was going to go up against a weakened Cincinnati Bengal defense that just is not good at anything this year. And he got no targets in the second matchup in week 16, so we weren't going to do it again. Yeah. That just happened to be a good play that nobody would have expected him to get 11 targets that game. And it was an unheard of. Yeah, I think it was a very unheard of situation. Yeah. I will admit, like I said, you look at the week earlier, him coming off early, making him a huge misprice with an offense that you didn't think was going to run exactly the same. So maybe there was more targets to go to him, but that was not guaranteed just because Matt Canada was gone. Yeah. Like, no one came out and said, we're going to give Freiermuth more targets that week. Everyone knew the offense was going to run differently, and so there were targets available.
Right.
For him to get 11 was crazy.
No, that's the outlier performance of it, the 11. Like, right. It's similar to when I brought up Adams. It's like, the reason I kept playing Adams this week and finally benefited from it was because I think the talent is there. And
Right.
so
That's
Freiburg,
the same thing with Henry, like we've been talking about.
right?
That's where like the whole point of this game for everyone is like all of these players are talented. We watch them every week because we are all football fans.
Mm-hmm.
And you know when you have a talented player. And you need to be willing, like, again, like this is gambling. Like I'll say it straight up. Like it is a game that can be won with a system, but you are still going to have to take chances with your money to play these games. Like even if it's a winnable game, the fact that you have to take chances with your money to try the game is gambling. Like there's plenty of games out there that are winnable. I can go to a Mario Kart tournament and basically gamble money on whether I can win. I know I can play Mario Kart. I know there's skill to playing that video game, but I still have to put up an entry fee to try to win a prize. And that's what DFS is. It's a bunch of these games that are totally winnable, but you have to put up your entry fee. And we put up our couple bucks every week, and we try to hit at a top prize.
And honestly,
I just wish I had a controller to control the players I want to do well.
Right? Like, I would have totally been like, no, I'll call the timeout for him and make sure Bijan's on the field for that Algier run.
well,
I'll get him the rest. We'll call it. I don't care. No.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I'll just speak on this for a management perspective really quickly before we close up shop. This has probably been one of my lowest performances of DFS profitability this season. But it's one of my highest profitable seasons in all of daily fantasy sports because the weeks I do not hit my lineups, like this week, we only made $1.50. I hit 80% of my props this year.
That's fucking crazy.
So I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I don't actually know if it's 80%, but it's very high.
Like, you have been doing like it may be very close to that. You have been doing very well in the props,
right? And like I have no problem with that. And like sometimes
you did take the Coach of the Year bet you were talking about earlier, right?
Right.
So like
Kevin Stefanski.
Yeah. It's like you look good on a lot of that stuff.
So, and it helps that I bet the Lions, obviously being a homer, I usually have a Lions future bet. This year, obviously, the highest outcome of that future bet hit, and they won a division. So I won there. So like, and you guys can see with the budget we have, mine isn't hidden. It's not an impressive number, but like that number shows up every week. And so you can see I'm not lying. But the lineups we're building are not providing the profitability they normally do. But I'm okay with that because I always say it each and every week, it's about diversifying your portfolio. We don't have to agree on how much of this is luck and how much of it's skill because we know it has both. It has skill and luck.
Yes.
I think
a lot of things in life, like as much as I poo-poo on saying that, a lot of things in life require skill and are affected by luck.
Yeah. The old ladies that get together with their friends on Sunday morning and they take a bus and they go down to the casino, like there is so much social ability and just camaraderie in those moments that's healthy for them. But like I wouldn't promote that everyone gambles because that can go unhealthy in the same way. So it's like you have to be able to balance life in that regard as well. Is there anything else you guys want to mention before we close up shop?
Yeah, so that was why I asked the question I did about 10 minutes ago with this particular lineup we're looking at right now, is that, A, it's a learning experience for me now that I've got a full football season and looking at DFS stuff, and B, I think it kind of comes along to not only just exploring what works as far as lineup construction, but something we could potentially try for next football season where we always have one lineup in play where we have this format to see how well does it do, being that so it's if we have something like a template like this where it could work a high percentage of the time, then that could be the way to go where we have to A, eat the chalk, and B, pick a stack that people are fading.
Right. I like that idea of having like that pillar every week of either having a core of 2 or 3 guys that are low owned that we really like that week, or a stack that is low owned that we really like, and then just filling it in from there. Because I can get projections, so I can fill it in with the top owned plays. That's not a big deal.
Perfect. Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, even though we played the Patriots defense, which is gonna be coached by a defensive guru in Bill Belichick, yeah, they just happen to have somebody do
defense is also really variant anyway. Like most of the time, there's one defense that gets like 15-20% ownership. This week, I believe it was Denver.
Yeah. And the Patriots just happened to fall into the end zone, so it just happened to work as a solid baseline with 9 points.
But also, defense is one of those things where, like, if you don't fall in the end zone, they might only score 5 or 6 points anyway. And that means a defense that got you nothing wasn't that far off of the defense that got 6 and was the top scoring defense.
Yeah. And,
and
picking an ideal defense is something I'd like to get into for another show, but just to try not to stray too off topic here with the way that we built this lineup, I think we're on to something here, guys. And I mean, if anybody here listening has anything to say on it, please, we'd love to hear it.
Like, I do like the strategy, and I think we do need to do more of that moving forward.
Evan,
it did work out, and I know it works out historically. So,
Evan, here's what I'll tell you, is there's a difference between being married to an idea and committed to it. I love that you're committed to DFS and like learning it and growing it and developing. And so you'll always have a pillar idea here on this podcast. As long as you're willing to do it, you always have that. I won't give you any absolute guarantees that this is how I'm going to format all my lineups, or this is how I think.
You always go like. To be fair, Logan, your lineups look a lot more ownership wise like my lineup in this 3 max.
Right.
Where it's like you'll have 1 or 2 of the guys that are higher owned, but then you might have the rest of the lineup is sub 5%.
And that's what I'm saying is, if Evan wants to salt and pepper this to his preference every week, and he wants this to be the way he prepares his dinner, I'm okay with that. Go ahead and eat it, man. Feedback is beautiful.
So
but I'm just not going to marry to one way to do something ever.
Well,
that's just me.
Well, I mean, the thing with your analogy with being married to something versus committed to something, without turning this into a marriage advice show, what I will say is that just because you are married to something and committed to something doesn't mean it's going to look exactly the same every week.
No, I agree with that.
We have to be ready to adjust who we play just based on the projections and the numbers that guys like Gov are going to have in front of us, where we can adjust week to week.
And the numbers are going to be different. Like, not every week are we going to have a 50% owned guy that's clear chalk.
Exactly.
Sometimes there might be a week where McCaffrey, Kyron, and name another dude are all 30% owned. So we have to make a choice of 2 of the 3 of them anyway.
And that's what I love about you, Evan, is we speak the same football language. We just use different languages to permit that word. So that's really what we're doing here. Because I agree with that. It's just I'm just never going to commit to one way to do something.
Yeah, I'm not ready to call it a love language, though, Logan. Just so you know.
Oh, I am, man.
Oh, I know you are.
But I'm very open. Call that the therapist in me, I guess. But with that being said, I'm going to let you guys go tonight because we did go over already an hour, but I thought this was a very good review show. We did miss Donnie. He should be back Saturday. Hopefully the youngster has some energy because we burned over an hour for you guys, but hopefully Donnie can pick us up on Saturday. We'll see you guys then.
Oh, we'll be ready. It's week 18.
Oh,
I forget. I had to ask Donnie, is this the last week before we decide who gets to pick the Super Bowl showdown captain?
I think it is. I think so.
We did say just the regular season, right?
Yeah, we're going to have to leave the people
so spread picks are down to last week. We're going to see what's going on.
That's right.
The countdown to Kyle Juszczyk.
Yes. Unfortunately, my Discord has now decided it is going to be a Cleveland-Tampa Bay Super Bowl.
Oh, my God.
So we will have to adjust from there.
I'm glad you mentioned Discord because to give the people the precursor to the Saturday show, we do have a Raise the Roof member who will be giving us the incentives for the week 18. And I do want to build a pillar off of those incentives.
We will build an incentive lineup. Yes.
I will
probably have one myself personally.
Incentive means so much in Week 18, and we'll get into all that on Saturday
It
night.
really does. Like, have you noticed that, Evan? How like teams specifically play in ways to get guys their catches and their yards and their touchdowns in games that mean nothing here in Week 18?
Yes and no, because every team has a different agenda.
Agreed. That is true. Not every team is going to prioritize everybody's things, but we know like certain player, like Brady was always going to get Gronk that extra $500,000 for 10 more catches. Oh, you need 8 catches? All right, we're going to get him in the first half, then you can sit.
It's why I played Austin Eckler this week, because he's actually like 100, or he was 101 yards away from a big bonus. And
He has another one if he can get 4 touchdowns in the final week too, but that one's a little crazy.
Right, that one's a bit crazy, and that's where you got to balance: is this one realistic, or is it are we witch casting here? Do we just
here's a good one that I've seen: Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he is 12 catches from the Lions single season record.
He is.
So no money incentive, but like team record. Would they try to get him 12 catches?
And I think that's where you have to know the personnel. Like, to Evan's point, is Dan Campbell also played for the Lions. He was part of the Lions when they were 0-16. So like team records and team success mean something more to Dan Campbell than it would, AT, for example, who's coaching the Raiders. I just think that's true.
It also works out that Dan Campbell is a great people person and great personal
Right. So really it all comes down to if St. Brown comes to Campbell and says, I want to be the single season record.
I would like,
and they will probably build a game plan around St. Brown getting 20 targets.
Right. And that's where you got to have fun with it too. Like, we're going to play some of these incentives and we're going to think, oh yeah, this is going to happen. And then it doesn't happen. You got to live with that result as well. Like, I think that's part of the fun of watching football every weekend.
Agreed. And like, this will be a fun week for that.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of that, let's save the rest of this for this weekend. Thanks to the guys for joining me. Have a good night, guys.
Good night, everybody.